Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a nice short break and feeling re-energized with your coffees and your teas, or just your water if you're super healthy. Yeah, we've got loads more content to come now, so really looking forward to our next session. Just before I introduce you to Elle and the rest of the panel, I'm just going to give a quick recap as to what's coming up and as to why this session's all about. Okay, so it won't be a sec. So coming up in a moment, we have our next panel session. Okay, and it's going to be a really interesting one. We've got the lived experience from the candidates at Goldman Sachs, Browne Jacobson and KPMG. Then speaking with Eddie Fletcher, who's head of social mobility at the Ministry of Justice. 3 o'clock, we'll be talking with careers professionals from 3 universities. And then at 3:45, we'll be talking with Margaret and Celeste from PA Consulting about their award-winning mentoring scheme. So again, just before I hand over to Elle and the panel, just a quick reminder about who we are and why this conference is taking place. So Sanctuary graduates are the early careers attraction and recruitment experts. We have built campus networks and university partnerships which allow us to reach any student in the UK. We're helping hundreds of businesses reach, attract and hire the best, most diverse graduate interns and apprentices. Diversity does really run through the core of our business. More than half of our clients come to us with a diversity need as their main reason for working with us. Our expertise in diversity and our proud partnership with the Social Mobility Foundation allows us to curate this annual conference, which we hope you're finding useful so far. We provide funding to support disadvantaged students at our partner universities. We donate money from every diversity client campaign to our partners, the Social Mobility Foundation, and we deliver expert sessions to our university partners, among many other things. If you want to learn how we can help your university, then please do drop me an email or connect on LinkedIn. Another quick reminder here of the different services that we do offer employers, all the way from diversity attraction marketing to end-to-end process management for graduates, interns, and apprentices. And finally, for those of you who manage your own recruitment but might need attraction and marketing support, here are the options that we have available. This includes driving diverse applications and ensuring you have enough, the right type of students at your events, as well as managing your entire early careers attraction marketing strategy. So if you'd like to know more about anything that we do and how we can help you, then please do drop me an email or connect on LinkedIn. We'll be more than happy to help. Okay, so back to the session then. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to our lovely panel, okay, and I will let them all introduce themselves, and it'll be Eleanor Sharp from Sanctuary who's taken over. Thanks, Elle. How you doing?
Thanks so much, Chris, and I hope you've all had a lovely lunch. Lovely to have you join us again this afternoon, and hopefully you found this morning really interesting. I know I certainly have. So for those of you who didn't meet me this morning, my name is Eleanor Sharp. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Sanctuary Graduates, and I've been at the business now for almost 8 years. And so our session now is really about lived experience, which I think we are going to probably remove our slides in a minute. Chris, we can still see your screen just as a heads up. And so I'm really excited to introduce 3 people today who are going to tell us about their experiences when it comes to joining the world of work and what they've done. So I will hand over, and perhaps if we go in alphabetical order, just to make it a little bit easier, if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are, and your name, who you are, what you do, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Oh, I think alphabetical order means I'm first.
Sorry, Beth.
Hi, everybody who is viewing. I am Beth. I am a associate solicitor at Browne Jacobson LLP. I have been qualified now just over 2 years, 2 years, 1st of March, and I specialise in banking and finance. But pre sort of solicitor days, it just came up the usual way. So I went to school, did my A-levels, did a straight law degree, did the LPC, classic route in. So yeah, that's me.
So I guess I'm next. My name is Platini Camden. I'm an analyst in the TMT team in London at Goldman Sachs. In terms of me, I'm actually from Birmingham. From the accent, you could tell. But yeah, I'm from Birmingham, born and raised there. And then I went to UCL, did econ and stats. So I was a big stats nerd. And then through university, just a bit like you guys, just joined organizations and applied. And I got here, and it's good. Thank you. Nice to meet you guys.
And I'll go next. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Viren Bhardwaj. So I work at KPMG and I'm a business skills manager. So that's a role within our learning function. And what it entails is I'm responsible for our firm-wide learning on project management, digital and data fluency, communications and personal impact. I joined KPMG not in the learning function, but on a graduate program in our management consultancy service line, and that was in people consulting, so focusing on HR and change management related consulting work. Prior to joining KPMG, I went to university in Bath, where I studied economics and international development, and actually had a connection with the Social Mobility Foundation prior to joining KPMG as well, where while I was doing my A-levels, I had a mentor at KPMG on the Aspiring Professionals program. So that was my first insight into work as a professional, and potentially later on in the session, I can cover that in a bit more detail. But pleased to be with you all today and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, everyone. And of course, we've got a Q&A function available. I'll be throwing questions out to our panel at any point. So if you have got anything you want to ask, please do tell us. Now, Viren, you've just told us a little bit about your experience, and I'd love to come to you first. Just to know a little bit more about your background, please, and any perhaps challenges you faced when you decided to move into your chosen profession.
Certainly. So I grew up in West London and went to comprehensive schools all my life, and I think where both my parents were immigrants into the country as well and did customer service related roles. I didn't necessarily have too many people in my immediate network that worked in traditional professional roles. So actually I found that support of careers advice at school and then the Social Mobility Foundation scheme that I mentioned was then quite useful to gain some insight into what professional services look like. But even with that preparation, I think then following my finishing university, I had done an office job and then applied and got into the graduate program at KPMG. And some of the things that I think going into a consulting role that maybe I wasn't quite prepared for and then presented a challenge was, I think, on the one hand, and this is something that's probably quite common with a range of graduate programs, there's just the balance of doing your day-to-day role whilst studying for, say, professional qualifications in your spare time. And on top of that, just learning the realities of, say, working with clients, building up your network, and doing things like that. So I think there was a lot to pick up right away and a lot to juggle all at once. Another feature of working in consultancy as well is every few months you might be working on different client engagements, and so there's a lot of variety there where you're not necessarily doing a set role each time, so you have to be able to learn quick and unlearn as well things that you might have done in a previous project just based on the team you're working in and the nature of that client organization. So that meant there was, on top of just balancing things on the side, that there was quite often some changes in my way of working. And I think finally joining as a graduate, where potentially your work experience prior to starting a graduate program is quite limited, that then going into a role where you're supporting on client projects can be a bit intimidating at times, and you're not necessarily sure when you're compared to, say, some of the colleagues you're working with who say either come from a very well experienced academic background or having years of work experience. You're not always sure what your contribution is right away. And I think there was, as a result of that, some confidence issues in just my ability to be able to speak up in client meetings or being able to put forward my ideas, just where then I felt in the rooms I was in that the people around me eventually had a lot more credentials behind them. So I think there was a bit of then just building up that confidence that was a challenge initially too.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I started, and if you were on the session, Ellie, today, I was also at KPMG on their school leavers scheme. And, you know, I can remember talking to some of my friends and peers that were on it who were really confident about some of the clients that they talked about. And I'd never heard of them. In my family, around our dinner table, we didn't talk about those kind of things. So actually, yeah, when you first start, you feel at a little bit of a disadvantage because you've got so much to learn so quickly. Beth, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your background, and the same question as Viren. Any challenges that you faced when you first entered the world of work?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I can echo a lot of what Viren said initially. I mean, I come from a very, very small town in the middle of Derbyshire. I also went to comprehensive schools for basically my entire education. And I come from a very working class family. So I am the first and only person to go to university in my family. All of my brothers, my father, my uncles, everybody, all labourers, all in hands-on work. And I suppose to put it into context, I come from a town where I still go back now and I tell people I'm a lawyer or a solicitor and they go, really? Like it's a thing that's completely unattainable from where I'm from, which it's not at all. But very similarly to Viren, because of that, very little to no knowledge as to careers and stuff that my school were able to provide in terms of branching out to those wider careers like lawyers, accountancy, things like that. None of that was really fed through to me until I started looking at my A-level choices and my options. And even then, I wasn't quite sure what picking different A-levels would mean for me and my career and how I moved those forward. I just sort of knew that despite what everybody said, I wanted to do law and I was going to be a lawyer. So I finished my A-levels, was lucky enough to secure a place at Nottingham Trent on their straight LLB. So I did straight law. And I suppose my biggest barrier, to put it quite bluntly, was finances. I didn't come from any support at all. I've always been completely self-supporting. I've lived on my own since I was 18. I've fended for myself from that age just because my parents have never been in a position, through no fault of their own, to be able to provide that backup. So when I came out of my uni degree, for me, it was a case of, okay, well, how am I going to do my LPC? Because I can't afford to do that. And at the time, it was either scholarship or bank loan. And I was exceptionally competitive. I couldn't get help at all from any of the law firms that I was applying for. So I had to make the very difficult position to just go into everyday work because I had no other option at the time. I had bills to pay, to put it bluntly. So for me, that was probably the biggest barrier. I couldn't find anywhere where anybody was willing to support me or back me through the next bit of my career to get me where I needed to go. Eventually, I'm lucky enough, and I'm sure we'll touch on it a bit more later, that I landed with a firm who provided that scholarship and they put me through the next stage of my career. But for me, yes, and it was very much a financial issue, and the fact that at the time, bearing in mind I graduated 2015, so we're talking a long time ago now, around 8 years, it wasn't really something that was recognised by universities. It was kind of a one model fits all, and there wasn't really anywhere else for me to go or any other option for me at the time. So, but then in terms of coming into actual professional work, I mean, above the stuff that I did pre my legal career, I have nothing but good experiences from that. And like I say, we can probably touch on that a bit more later. But my biggest barrier was at that sort of university pre-professional academic stage for me.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. You saying about when you go home and you tell people what you do. I mean, still a long time after I've graduated, I go home and tell people I went to university and get called posh, which, you know, is not in some spheres at all. You know, it's really interesting. And it's not just necessarily your training costs, is it? It's all those costs when you think about, I need a new wardrobe. you know, I need to have clothes that would be professional. I need to be able to get myself to places, all those kind of things. So yeah, it's those things that we have to think about now as we start to bring the next generation of people up through. What are things that you don't think are a cost, which actually could be, because they just don't have access to those. Platini, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your background. You've already mentioned about where you grew up, but anything about kind of any of the challenges you faced when you joined your profession?
Yeah, I think for me, I was lucky enough that I went to a top school when I was a child. I went to a top grammar school, so academically I was okay. So I went to UCL, and there everyone pretty much from the first week talks about finance. So it's more of a natural flow that you then apply for spring week or internship, which I did. I think in terms of challenges, I think most people face this that don't live in Birmingham, in London, is that you're thinking, do I sound right? I think that's the first thing, right? Like, is my accent good enough? Do I look the part? It's just these little insecurities that people have, right? And I'd say initially I had that when I joined in the summer, but you quickly realize that people actually don't care about these things. It's just things that are in your head. They play in your head, and you just keep thinking about it. I think another thing is having an insecurity of like fitting in. I think a lot of people have that, right? Like, do I do the same hobbies, or I don't know, do I play golf, or am I a rugby player or something? That too is something that does happen, and you just have to be aware of it and know that that's not the only thing that can tie you to someone that you work with. Yes, both of you could come from different socioeconomic, but you may have other things in common, right? So I think these are the challenges. I mean, for myself, there were challenges for maybe like a day, and I forgot about it. I think naturally I'm a quite confident person, so yeah, I don't really get fazed by anything. So for me, it was okay. But I know for someone that is not as confident, that could be a really big challenge.
Absolutely. Katina, is there anything in particular that the organisation Goldman Sachs has helped you with in terms of, you know, overcoming these challenges, or any of the things that they have in place that you think, yeah, that's fantastic?
Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of things in place, I mean, there's networks. That could be through the Women's Network, that could be through the Black Professionals Network, that could be through people that have different sexualities network. There's all these things, and there's also mentorship programs. I think this is something that differentiates Goldman Sachs in terms of like interning here and starting out here, is that you have these mentorship programs where you're given a mentor that is a super senior guy, and that's been here for a long time. And it can be daunting at first, but when you get to know the person, and it's always good to have someone that looks over you, because you may not know the little things that you should do when you join. It's just having someone that can say, oh, okay, these are the small things you can do. These are the, I don't know, like the softer things. And having someone that can refine that is key, especially here at Goldman. And I know particularly it helped me when I was an intern. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Beth, you've spoken a little bit about the support you've had at Browne Jacobson. Anything else that really helped you overcome the challenges?
So I think for me, pre-Browne Jacobson, I was very much in a place where I think I've been a bit beaten down by the red tape and the process of the way my career, back when I did it, it's very much changing now, but was supposed to go. It was mapped out from day one as to where you were supposed to be at certain points, and I hadn't hit any of those. And I think I was coming up to about 23 and I still hadn't done anything legal really, other than the small amounts of work experience I'd done at uni. And I think for me, I mean, I would resonate with Flintini when he says he's quite a confident person. I would say I would put myself in that category, but I had really hit in a place where I think I even considered going back and doing my PQE and teaching instead. At one point, I genuinely thought my career was not going to get off the ground. And for something so silly as well, like not being able to afford a section of your career that's only a year long. And then I applied for Browne Jacobson just as a general administration assistant. At this point, I just thought anything to get through the doors of a firm. And what has been really refreshing for me has been, first and foremost, they have a sort of, they don't look at past legal experience as from the get-go. And they don't take account of any of your grades, anything like that. It's very much you, your personality, how you fit in with the firm. And also a big thing for me from them was that they're quite au fait, and I think a lot of firms now are, on transferable skills. So while I had no legal experience against people coming in at my same level, I had a lot of experience in other roles that was still enough for me to apply it to the one I was now in. So they really recognized that, and they gave me the opportunity. And then very quickly, once I was in the firm, I was still sort of like, I was always open and honest from day one that, you know, I wanted to be a solicitor. That's where I wanted to be. I didn't want to be an admin assistant for the rest of my life. And at no point did anybody say, oh, well, you know, you've been employed as an admin assistant, and if you want to do that, it's a different role. And I never felt any resistance there. My team from day one did everything. They put me through secondments, and they set me off on different tasks, and they really built up my personal portfolio and my network in order for me to be in a position for when those contract applications opened. I stood a great chance against everybody else. And then, you know, on top of that, they then, once I went through those applications, fully paid for the next stage of my career and supported me in every stage, because again, finances will always play a part through everything that I do, just unfortunately because of my background. But they understood that while I did my LPC, I still had to be working full time, because I had, you know, I had other things in my personal life that required that level of financial support. So they tailored roles, they made my job completely flexible, they were completely understanding of things like exams that I had to go away and do, and university days that I had to be on. And they worked with me as a person, knowing where I wanted to be. And I can honestly say, up until that point, I'd never had that level of support from anybody else that I had touched base with over the stages of building my profession. So I very quickly grew very confident in myself and my abilities and what I was bringing to the table, because they always made me feel like no matter at what part of my career I was at, I always had something to give, and they were quite happy to nurture that and help that grow. So nothing but good things to say about them, as you could probably tell.
Yeah, definitely. It's so interesting. And Viren, we'll come to you in a minute, but it's so interesting that both of you have said about how, yes, it's so important to have these schemes, these programs, these things that in place that can support on the large scale, but actually very often it's a case-by-case basis. Not everything fits. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And actually, it's taking that time to listen to a candidate or a student or somebody in your business's needs and understanding, because what might work for one person isn't what the other person needs. And perhaps you've got some examples of how KPMG have supported you with any of the challenges that you found.
Yeah, certainly. I would firstly echo the points already raised in terms of there being the availability of mentoring schemes, staff networks, and through, I think this is relaxed even further in more recent years, but just the entry requirements, taking into consideration the range of experiences people could come to the professional careers with. Even the grade requirements, I think now are at 2-2, where at first that would sometimes be a barrier for people going for graduate programs. In terms of some additional things I had in mind, I think prior to joining KPMG, I was quite well supported in there being some touch points with the firm. So I think at that point, Facebook was more commonly used. So there was like a Facebook group set up for people applying to the firm so we could connect to each other. So for people that didn't live in London, they could have a chance to meet some other people who would be having to move as well and potentially move in together. There was also a day where we got to come in and have a bit more insight into the firm and our teams, if we could make it prior to our formal start date. And also the option to have some financial support. So this was on a loan basis, where it would be essentially getting an upfront payment for some of your salary. So the kind of things like having the office attire and being able to have some money up front to say if you did have to pay rent or travel around London, you'd have some kind of cushion there. And that would then be something you paid off over the course of your employment. But it was quite helpful to have some of that money up front, and I did take up that offer. The other side, once I'd started at the firm, that I found quite helpful was starting with a graduate induction. So immediately I had a cohort of peers who were on the same scheme as me, as well as people who were just joining the consulting function more broadly. So then as the weeks went on and I was then in my role, I'd already built up some of those connections and had some time to ask questions that otherwise I might have felt a bit embarrassed to ask, or that might have felt silly in that induction setting. So I found that really helpful. And I think beyond that, just being on a structured grad program was quite helpful, where I'd mentioned the uncertainties of my role at various points, that actually knowing that I had some formal qualifications to get through then gave me that confidence. I didn't know what I was talking about as I was picking up that, say, HR expertise, and also being given those varied experiences and doing well through those meant that actually maybe if I was just doing the same role for a year, but actually having done 3 or 4 different roles in that time meant I had picked up quite a breadth of experience. And it got to a point sometimes when I would look back and think, can't believe I've sort of done all these things in a year. And then that was also quite like reaffirming and helped with that confidence side. I think the other thing that was really crucial is then just having a really supportive team around me as well, where I think they were quite used to there being an intake of graduates, and my team in particular and the people consulting side, maybe it is just from having more of that HR discipline within a lot of our team, that we had some additional support where there was like more of an informal 6-weekly touch point for the new graduates to come together and share our experiences. And we got some we had like buddies who had been through the graduate scheme like a year prior to us, give us some support along the way. So I think that meant that we had some formal structures in place, and then quite a lot of colleagues who put in extra time and supported us along as well. So I think that helped massively.
Definitely. Just to remind everyone, if you'd like to ask questions, please do pop them in the Q&A box. We've got plenty of time to discuss them later. And Browne, you're so right, those informal networks are just as important as those formal ones sometimes. People that I made at the start of friends with through those informal networks when I joined KPMG in 2011, one of those was best man at my wedding. So it goes to show really how actually they can be so important for the personal side of things, and especially when you're going into the world of work and you just want people going through the same thing as you, but also the networks that you can develop and take further as you're going to different roles and bits and pieces there. It's absolutely key. Beth, I'd like to come over to you, and I'd love to ask you, you've talked so much about your journeys and how perhaps it's not the typical way that people might look at when they're looking at getting into the role that you're in. But if you're thinking about advice that you'd give to employers that really want to recruit and develop disadvantaged candidates, what would you say you would say to them?
I think the biggest thing for me, looking at both my journey and having spoken to sort of other people from similar backgrounds that come in during work experience here at the firm, etc., is messaging more than anything. I still think, unfortunately, we very much today live in a culture where it's still like you'll say to somebody, "Oh, what university are you going to?" and they say Cambridge or Oxford, and you're considered elite. Or there's still those messages that I had when I was coming through, such as, "Oh, you can't be working and doing your LPC at the same time. It's just not plausible. It's not a good thing to do." Or like I can remember lecturers telling me when I was doing my law degree, "Oh, if you haven't got training contracts by now, or you haven't had your applications, or you've got no legal experience, you really are a block behind everybody else." And I think people need to recognize how damaging that messaging can be on those that are coming through, because I talk to people now that are younger than me, and they're like, "Oh, well, I don't think I'll be able to do that, or I haven't got the ability to get that experience, or is that going to stop me from doing X, Y, and Z? And it really shouldn't. I mean, I don't come from anything special, but I mean, I'm not saying anybody is any less of academic than I am, but I would put myself up on a par with people that have gone to Cambridge, etc. I think I'm, you know, I do just as well for myself. But I really do think that's where we need to start in terms of what we're advertising out there. But I also think we also need to strike the balance very carefully in terms of making sure that people that are from disadvantaged backgrounds don't feel like it's being plastered and displayed. Like, you know, you get your scholarship kids and the kids that are classed as automatically classed as must be coming from disadvantage because they're here on full scholarship or they haven't got here by themselves. And I think you touched on it briefly earlier, Eleanor, that it's also that level of understanding that while I think we're very good at leveling the playing field across the board, it's recognizing that actually some people need different things, that, you know, I might come in as opposed to another one of my colleagues, and I might need that extra support because I've got other stuff going on at home, or I might need, sort of like Browne mentioned, they got offered the opportunity to have a loan up front to help with some of their initial support. I might be somebody that needs that, or I might need be somebody at university that actually I can't afford the 6-7 books that you need me to have for this course, or, you know, I've got an interview or a mock trial, but I don't have a suit, I can't afford that. So I think it's both a messaging piece and also an understanding that while we're very good at equality now, I think it's that equity bit. It's understanding that one model doesn't fit everybody, I think.
Yeah, you're so right, Beth. It's about how do you level that playing field in a way that everybody's got the same opportunities, and those little nuances that you talk about, they're so key and so important. Platini, perhaps you could tell us about any advice you would give to potential employers who want to support disadvantaged students.
For me, I know it's a sensitive topic, but for me, I think it's all about, I mean, doing my 2 pence here. I think a lot of these big city jobs, it's all about, it's a class thing first, if I have to put it bluntly. In terms of how you sound, because I have a lot of friends that, I mean, we came from Birmingham together, and me in a sense, like I'm kind of a chameleon, in the sense that I can fit into either or because of my education and how I came about. But I come from like a normal background. I think overall, employers should kind of contextualize the person in front of them, right? Like, you can't expect everyone to sound the same, but unfortunately, like, it's just these little comments. Oh, like, we don't know if you'll fit right with clients or something. I think that's the blunt thing, and it's easier to say than actually execute contextualization, because at the end of the day, you're a business. You want to hire the best person, right? So it's a hard debate, right? Another thing I wanted to talk about, I think at the bottom is good, but I also think representation at the top is also really important, in terms of seeing someone that's close or similar to you that is, I don't know, a senior. I think that's a luxury that a lot of groups have that some subgroups may not have. And having that kind of touch point of, oh, this person, I don't know, it doesn't have to look like me or come from the same background or vibes with me. I think these are the little things that make people more comfortable where they are. I know personally, I have people that may be senior, but they don't look like me, but we vibe on so many different levels, and that's what matters. Yeah, it's a sensitive topic, but that's my 2 pence.
Yeah, it's so much about representation, isn't it? It's being able to look at those structures that are in place in any business and going, am I represented there? Or is there anybody that relates to me? Or have these people been through the barriers that I have? It's really interesting you were talking about what are the things that are said to you which you can read into. That candidate's hasn't got quite enough finesse. They're not quite polished enough. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, like I think the question of being polished, I think all that means is, can the person hold themselves well in front of a client, or can they sound right, or can they like vibe with people? I think that's more the softer skills, and that's something, unfortunately, it's hard to teach. It's something that the British schooling system, like, you learn as you go through, if you go to the right schools, right? Which is it's a shocking truth, but it is, right? So, for example, in my case, I went to school where I was an anomaly, right? Just like a kid there. So I grew up like being like everyone else, but when really it's just a chameleon thing, right? So yeah, it's a reality of the UK, right? But
yeah. Thank you. Browne, we'll come over to you then, just any kind of advice you give to employers. I think what we've talked a lot about is how, yes, it's important to recognise these people in the business, but also not take it to the extreme where you're almost othering people and kind of pointing them out. But anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think perhaps prior to someone from a disadvantaged background joining the firm, some things that could help them get through the door and be aware of the opportunities too, which I'm seeing increasingly, is, I think for me, whilst an organization can have their own structured approach to campaigning, and actually I think broadening out the types of universities they consider, and potentially looking at the ways that they can work with schools or other and across a range of different channels. So maybe not just relying on in-person things, but starting to use social media increasingly to sort of target where some of their opportunities are being seen. The other thing that I think is a very valuable asset is your employees themselves and sharing their real stories. Because I think for me, the thing that helped to break down some of the mental barriers I had about applying to say a Big Four accountancy firm was actually having that insight day. And it doesn't even have to be something as involved as that. It could even be through like having things like LinkedIn, or having then a day in the life of type stories of different roles in your organization. And I think something where a lot of us are working in a hybrid way, just seeing that actually you could say be an accountant, but say work from home a couple of days a week, and it just be quite informal in that sense, in terms of how you're speaking with your clients and partners in a firm, could actually, I think, help people to see themselves in those roles a bit more. And then as people are in the organization, then one thing that is come up recently in KPMG is having a social mobility employee network. But I think for it's specifically raising awareness of some of the challenges that colleagues and from lower socioeconomic backgrounds might have, is actually just by having that conversation, having people share their stories. And I think, yeah, as Platini said, having that visibility at the top of the firm as well, for if you've got any senior people in that organization that have similar examples themselves of how they've potentially risen up in a profession against quite a few odds that would have been stacked against them, and that can be quite inspiring as well. And then I think just while people are in the firm, having both those informal and formal development opportunities, so that people are able to see that growth in their skill sets and see other roles as well, which they could progress into, is then quite a good way of retaining that talent as well and getting the best out of them.
Thank you. Now, I'm really conscious of time. We've had some great questions come in. Browne, you make a great point there. The pandemic was a great leveler, really, when it came to everybody had to work from home. You know, you went into the living rooms or the spare bedrooms of people really senior at organizations, and so most of the time they were very much like you. But also, how do you balance that? You know, you want to bring people into your business so they can learn, and they can learn all those soft skills that they might have not had in their previous experience. But then if you're allowing people to work from home occasionally, does that mean that they're able to save less on rent because they can perhaps not have to be in an expensive city the whole time? I know if I'd been able to stay at home a bit more and work from home when I first started my career, I'd have been able to juggle getting my washing done for getting into work the next day. You know, it's all these things that sound silly, but actually are the barriers that are in place, because people go, I can't imagine my life changing so much. that I'd step into that life, and it's just not something that's realistic for me. So like I said, I'm a little bit conscious of time, and I'm just going to throw some questions out there, so just jump in if you've got an answer. So first and foremost, for those of you not originally based in London, why did you choose to move either to London for work, or to London for work, rather than perhaps other cities in the UK, such as Birmingham or Manchester, or closer to your university choice?
I don't know if I'm best placed to answer this because I don't live in London, I live in Manchester. I could tell you when I was choosing where I wanted to be based, because of the stigma around the Golden Circle and the lawyers of London, I knew for a fact that that was never somewhere I wanted to be. London City was never an option for me. I just didn't feel like I came with the background and the skill set that those Golden Circle firms demanded. I just felt like I had a CV that would get glanced at and pushed to one side if it was put in front of, you know, the big Alan Overys of the world, etc. I mean, I know now, having done my career for some time, that would never have been the case, but it just wasn't. It was just never something I personally thought about. London was never on my radar to begin with, so I've always been in the region. So probably better place for somebody in London to actually comment.
To be fair, for me, I just wanted to get away from Birmingham. I had enough of Birmingham, and I was like, yeah, where can I go that is far enough from Birmingham? And I just applied, and I got into London Uni, and then by chance, like, finance seems to be in London, so I applied here.
Yeah, I mean, I could take it as well. I mean, there were no opportunities where I'm from. Boston and Lincolnshire isn't exactly a hub of lots of opportunities. And so I had to make that move if I really wanted to take the career in the direction that I wanted to. Now, like I said, this is a while ago now, so maybe I wouldn't have had to have made that severe a choice at 18 like you did, Beth, to move away and move very far away from my family. Perhaps we could throw into the table then, what gave you the confidence to make, and this is for anybody, to make the first step getting into the career that you're in now?
I'm happy to cover this one. So I think it was that exposure of having a mentor for me through Social Mobility Foundation that gave me that confidence, where actually it was via speaking to that mentor, who then also helped me to get a week of work experience at KPMG, that then, especially meeting some of the graduates, for me made it feel like it was something that I could fit in with, as they were very down to earth, very genuine, and I thought I would feel more out of place than I did in reality. And actually, just from how friendly everyone was, I did think it was a route I could go down. I think there was also a little bit of just taking a risk as well, which came into it. It was no guarantee that I was going to get through, and I did sort of have in mind that I would have to apply for several graduate schemes and just give it a go. I think one of the things that helped me to pick out graduate schemes as well, that I felt more comfortable applying for too, is I think if they were quite clear on what the role would expect, and the recruitment process itself was well outlined. And that's something as well, if I, for example, didn't live in London and so I'd have to interview in London a couple of times, that might have been something that would have put me off. But the fact that actually a lot of it, there was only one assessment centre, made it feel as something that I could manage a bit more, even though that was something that was still something that was made me feel a bit nervous. But because it was just the one-off, it didn't feel too bad.
Yeah, and I know KPMG, we work really closely with them, and having worked there is now I've changed it so that it's a really tight process. They get things turned around really quickly. You know, people aren't having to come back multiple times, and even that, you know, they're paying, but they might get reimbursed. But that upfront payment often is too much for people, and is a barrier once again. And just finally then, because we are almost at the end of our session, Beth, we've had a question in for you, and it's just to get some clarity actually. They've asked, did you mention that you weren't able to afford a placement year or a sandwich year? And if that's so, how do you think that might have affected your chances and opportunities if you had have completed it? Or perhaps just more widely, you know, weren't able to complete an internship or something like that?
Mm-hmm. So it's twofold. Yes, I couldn't afford to do a placement year, and I also couldn't afford to do my LPC at the end of my degree. I think basing it purely on how the market was when I came out of my degree, as I said before, bear in mind that was 8 years ago, and it has changed significantly. Placements and training contract opportunities were very much based on legal work experience that you could show on your curriculum. So if I had had the opportunity and somebody had supported me through doing a professional placement or a sandwich year, I would have had maybe I wouldn't want to say better, because I'm one of those people that believes everything happens for a reason, but I would have maybe been better placed going into those firms and into those training contract applications at that time, with something behind me to show that actually I've done placements in this professional field and I'm competent and I can do it. Whereas instead the experience I had was, it was that roundabout experience where you went to a firm and they said, oh, well, you need experience to do this role in this profession, and you don't have experience, but I'm never going to get experience if nobody gives me the opportunity to get it. So it was going round and round in the same circle. So eventually, I think after about 20 applications, like I say, I gave up and I went into normal work because of my own personal pressures. But I think it would have made a difference, yes. Had somebody come forward and said, look, we realise where you want to be, you need the support, you need the help, and we're willing to offer it to you. I think maybe, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I might have just qualified a couple of years earlier than I had done. It might not have made a massive difference overall to my career, but it would have definitely made a lot of difference to both my confidence and my early stages of my career, I think.
Definitely. And Beth, perhaps you've got so much experience now, and I'm sure you have, that actually make you so much better at what you do, because you've actually gone and done something different to a lot of your colleagues. And perhaps actually we need to look at CVs and go, what advantages of, I know we do with a lot of our clients, but what advantages are they bringing in, because they haven't chosen the traditional route and aren't thinking the same as everybody else. Thank you so much for your time. Chris, I think that's the end of our session, isn't it? So we've got questions. I'm sorry we can't cover them all.
Thanks to the panel again as well. Good to see you, and yeah, well done. That was really, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Elle.
Bye.